on the thing. Hello, Internet. Welcome to the bi-weekly Backdrop CMS community meeting. We meet every 2 weeks and discuss sort of, user-focused topics related to Backdrop CMS. Today's topic is going to be on config recipes, which my colleague St. Paul Tim will be leading. Let's start off with a quick round of introductions, which participants can choose to skip if they don't want to be involved with that. But I'll start. My name is Luke McCormick. I'm a web project manager in San Ramon, California. I'm going to pass it over to Greg if you're ready and willing.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Greg. I'm joining from Melbourne, Australia. I'm a Drupal support engineer and developer and interested in general in anything in Backdrop and any way that I can help. So yeah, that's it. I'll pass it on to Kansas City team if he's around.
Hi, I'm Tim from Kansas City, not to be confused with St. Paul Tim. Just trying to catch up on the session I missed from the Backdrop Live. So I'll be multitasking, so I may be not paying attention at times. So just warning you if you call on me and I don't answer.
Sure. I'll jump in then. My name is St. Paul Tim, or Tim Erickson. I'm not in St. Paul, but in Deerwood, Minnesota right now. And anyways, we're coming off of Backdrop Live and a lot of energy and momentum. And we decided to reprise a little discussion that I had, or that I led at Backdrop Live on config recipes, where I talked a little bit about what config recipes are, what we currently have, and where they are leading us, and get this all recorded so that we can share it with other people in the future. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. I'm just diving in, and for this presentation, I'm actually going to just go ahead and spin up a demo Backdrop site. And I like to do this live because I like during presentations, because I want to reinforce to other folks that that these Backdrop demo sites are available for you to test things out. It's a great tool for quickly reviewing features, showing off Backdrop to other people. You click on that button and 30 seconds later or less, you get a link to visit your site, and boom, we're there. We have a live site. So it's that quick. You can also use these demo sites to test modules or themes. It's possible to download them into these test sites, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of use a test site to demonstrate config recipes and how they work. And I think it's the demo sites that are beautiful for config recipes, because it's always best to try out a config recipe on a disposable site, because they're not easily uninstalled. And so I would recommend, before you use a config recipe, to spin up a demo site, install it, make sure it's doing what you want before you put it on your other site. Otherwise, the other way to get rid of a config recipe is pretty much to just to manually delete the parts that it added. One of the definitions of config recipes is that they primarily rely on config files in Backdrop CMS to add functionality to your site, that they don't really config functionality, right? That they're not adding anything new through PHP to your site. But what they're doing is like setting up a content type, setting up some views, maybe dropping this new content view onto a layout. You'll see some of that in a minute. But it's all stuff you could build by yourself, but a config recipe just does it for you real quickly, saves you the time, and also might do some things that you didn't know how to do. For example, some config or some views config or advanced advanced stuff. So
Tim,
you-
before you go on, excuse me, sorry, just maybe worth mentioning. It's mentioned in the message on the previous screen when you spin up the site, but these sites get destroyed after 24 hours, so they're just playground.
Absolutely.
Just be
Yes.
aware. If you do whatever you're doing, you want to save your work. Yeah, just be aware of that.
Yes.
Do it at the 23rd hour or something before it gets destroyed. Yeah.
Absolutely. I didn't know. Thank you for reminding me. What's your name? Greg.
Greg.
Thank you for reminding me, Greg, because that is an important point I had intended to make, and then I slipped past it. But it also gives you the freedom to do what you want here and not worry about it, right? Because it's just going to go away after 24 hours. You could manually install backup and migrate, or and export your config in your database if you wanted. I've never bothered to do that, but anyway. So one of the things we're going to do here is we're going to jump into the list modules, and if you want to add, there are a handful of config recipes. And I just go to the install modules. And again, not everybody may be aware that you can install modules. Any supported module on backdropcms.org should be available through the install modules interface and is accessible for these demo sites. I actually had been using these demo sites for a long time before it occurred to me that I can actually add modules and themes as well. So keep that in mind. Anyways, if I search for recipes, there's only a handful of them right now, and we're going to just go ahead and take a look at them. Now, the card recipe is redundant for this particular demo because we already have it. The purpose of the card recipe was to provide the card content type, which was added in a recent version of Backdrop CMS, and to add this view for those who might have an existing site. The card recipe only gets added to new sites. It does not get added to old sites when they upgrade. So if you have an old site and you want the card, the card content type, you can use this card recipe to very quickly spin that up. So we can't really look at that one today. The next one we're going to look at, let's do the FAQ recipe because it's really pretty simple. So we can go ahead, put this in the queue and install it. Now, some of these recipes do have dependencies on other modules. And that's an interesting discussion about where that fits into the our long-term plan for recipes. But it allows us to sort of, again, we're not creating any new PHP to do something that either Backdrop or this other config module can't do. But a recipe, in this case, mostly just for display purposes, we found the Views Bootstrap module. Actually, we don't need the demo. We just need the FAQ recipe and Views Bootstrap. We're going to enable those, and they're done. And if we go to our front page, we're going to see one that there's a menu item has been added to FAQ. We go here, and there's a view of several FAQs. This module also puts some sample content into the site. If we go to the content menu, we can first of all see that there's a new content type called FAQ, where we can add a new question and answer. Or we can, if we just view the content, we can see the sample content that's been added, and we could really easily delete that. Just, select the 4 nodes. Once you've seen how it works, you don't want that content anymore. Just select the nodes, hit delete content, and execute. I'm going to leave it there because I want that to hang around for a little bit. And I'm talking quickly so we get through the demo part and can get to the discussion soon. But those of you who are here in the meeting, interrupt me at any time. And I think there's only a few recipes, so we're going to walk through them all. The testimonials one, really quickly, let's install that. It doesn't look like this one does require any other, and I'm going to go leave that open. I'm going to go to this other tab, refresh the page. So actually, if I scroll down, this one, again, the idea is to add a testimonial with this kind of a format. And this one, in addition to adding the content type in the view, it also places a block version of the view on the front page of the site, which is a common use case for testimonials, right? Because we've got that sort of landing page that at some point has, a testimonials block. The same things are true. We've also added a testimonials page, which kind of repeats the same view on it. If we now have a testimonials content type that you can add to, and likewise, it's added 3 testimonials with default content for you to view, and you could just delete those if you didn't want them. I'm keeping them because one of the use cases for config recipes, not the primary one, but one of them is if you're like building a theme or doing a demo and you just need some sample content, these testimonial or these recipes are a way to like quickly add some content to your site as well if you're in some cases. So let's go back to the module. Go ahead.
Is there, when you install recipes, is there or could there be or should there be sort of a list of what kind of thingies it's going to install?
Right. I think we should talk more about that in the like roadmap. But, and again, not everybody may be aware of this feature, but in Backdrop, you can, especially on this install, actually, I think, can we do this on the list from the project installer? You can click on the link to the .info page. In all of my modules, I try to create a list of exactly what the recipe is doing. And I would say that that's not a requirement, but a best practice. If you create a recipe, to make sure that you provide a really clear list about what exactly that recipe is doing. So that, because there is no, as I mentioned before, there's no uninstall process. So if somebody adds this and wants to get rid of it, they're going to just have to manually go in and delete the 4 nodes, the menu item, maybe disable the module they don't need and delete the content type.
Can I suggest something? So do you know off the top of your head if the recipes, because they behave as modules, they probably allow having install hooks. So you can add an install hook to any of these, because I'm assuming you're maintaining some of them, right?
I'm maintaining all of them right now, but we're hoping. One of my goals, I said, by the next Backdrop Live, I want to see at least one config recipe from someone other than me.
Right. So you can, I'm assuming because they're behaving as modules, you can add an installation hook, and the only thing that it does is just sets backdrop set message, and then it has a bullet points. So instead of people needing to know that they need to go to these things outside the site, it would be just right after they enable the recipe. It will say a new content type has been created, 3 items were added, a view was created, or blocks and placed in the front page. So it could be a list of things without them having to go outside the website to.
I like that idea. And in fact, I think I do use something like that on one of my recipes we're going to see in just a minute, but I don't think it didn't occur to me for this specific purpose. And I like that idea.
I think you're using an install hook for all the demo content that they add.
Yes. I'm going to come back. Greg, why do I keep forgetting your name, Greg?
And why do you keep admitting it?
Well, I think it's because of all of our usernames. I'm so used to like Clonos, but I don't want to call them Clonos here. So, we'll look at the code and we'll see what I have done with install hooks. So I am using install hooks for other things, and that's one of the as we've talked about before. Whether or not like that's the right use of in a recipe, we'll have to make decisions about in the future. I'm just trying to experiment with recipes right now and figure out what they can and can't do, and then we'll have to sort of figure out the path forward. I'm going to jump to the enabled modules recipe report. This is another kind of a use case where we had a core feature that wanted this report, and there's talk about adding this to core. But we discovered that, in fact, it was possible to build the report that somebody was asking for using existing tools and views. And so I said, well, let's just for now create a recipe. We'll see if people like it, if it's possible or popular, and then we can decide if it should go into core. So I've enabled and installed this module, and all it does is it creates a view, which is added to the reports menu called enabled modules. And the purpose of this module was that if you're one of the use cases of this module is you're reporting an issue in the issue queue, and somebody says, well, what modules do you have installed? You can figure that out in some of the other reports, like the status report, or if you go to your modules page, but it's kind of hard to cut and paste them. This is a page with a report that you can really easily just sort of cut and paste into an email. You can also easily filter by just show me core modules or just show me contrib modules. I think we talked about whether or not you could it would recognize custom module. I think custom modules would show up under contrib. Isn't that what we decided, Joseph?
I don't think I was the one who helped you with this.
Okay. We were talking about this at Backdrop Live, and I don't have the exact answer, but I kind of feel like if you created a custom module, it would show up when you did contrib. Anyways, I'm not going to, we don't have any contrib. Well, actually, we do have a contrib. We do have a contrib module because we have our recipes. So if I hit contrib modules, these are the contrib modules that I've enabled. Go ahead, Joseph.
I think in the system module, it just tracks core or not core.
Right. That's what I was thinking, which is why if you created a custom module, I think it would show up in this contrib module space.
Yeah, whereas on the issue that we have, it's an older issue to filter the modules page. We because I remember Jen and I used to work on the algorithm or the logic that was filtering. We had 3 different buttons or radio buttons, and it was distinguishing between contrib and custom. So you could say that the system module as it works now that provides the views filters is sort of like has this as a shortcoming that we could fix.
Okay. Great. So let's go back. We've just got 2 more modules, and I don't know. I'm sorry, spacing here. 2 more recipes. Oh, I like it. It remembers my previous search.
I mean, I noticed that before. It's so cool. I
Yeah.
didn't know you were doing that.
So the user, the welcome recipe includes the user guide recipe. So basically what the welcome recipe is it just adds a bunch of content to your site to sort of help you learn about Backdrop, really is the intent. And I included the user guide as part of it, but I thought some people might just want the user guide. So I broke them out as separate recipes. If you enable the welcome recipe, you'll automatically get the user guide one. So I think we're just going to go ahead and do the user guide or the welcome one, the whole thing. And I'll show you the part that you could get separate if you did it. And this is where I think I do what you talked about, Greg. This one is also a little bit ambitious. It creates mini layouts and it does some other things. So when I hit install, one more message, we're not going to back it up. Oh, I still haven't done the installation, right? So we're adding the content view access. I'll show you why, and the mini layouts, couple of other things. This is kind of a little bit ambitious for a recipe, but it's working. There it is. So here is, I did do this, Greg, which I think uses what you were talking about.
Yes.
Creates an info message, and it sort of warns the user that we've enabled some content, but you'll have to manually delete it. And it also says, reminds them we've added some contrib modules, but we could be more detailed about that. And I could use this in all the recipes, right? I think that's what you were suggesting.
Yes. Yeah.
So now if we go to the homepage of this site, this recipe is kind of intended like for demos or just giving people examples to better see the things you can do in Backdrop. This recipe does use some PHP install code to do things like it changes the default image in your to something maybe a bit more attractive. It adds the user guide up here. It also adds some content on the about page. It creates a footer that contains a block of recent content, and this footer, it uses the mini panels. And so it's kind of a way, if you want to learn about mini panels and see how to, one way of kind of creating a footer, you can do that. You could install this module and play around. I put a note here saying that the opera theme will make this look a little bit better. So let's go ahead and do that. The opera theme is another theme that I created. Well, of course we have to install it. So we can install themes using the demo. Let's enable and set that as the default. Love feedback and contributions to the opera theme if anybody is so inclined. But for now, some of the highlights of the opera theme aren't necessarily visible, but there's a number of little changes in terms of the color scheme. I think one of the things the opera theme, there was some weird spacing down here that got fixed from basis to opera, and I wanted a theme that would work well with this module or this recipe, but this recipe is still a little ugly. And the point is, we don't know when you're importing content, you're importing it into different themes, and it's going to react differently in every one. So it isn't necessarily pretty, but it's there. We have, I wanted to demonstrate submenus, and so we actually created some pages. The other thing I did do is create like links to videos about some of the things you're seeing. So if you wanted to use this sort of as an instructional tool, if we go to news, there's a bunch of articles, what are posts, promoted content. And again, in a few cases, we have links to offsite videos. Oh, the other place that I used the video, so that's why this recipe required the video embed module, I think it was. It also, again, I mentioned you could get the user guide independent of the rest of the content. So if you just wanted the user guide, you could download that. And the user guide is trying to solve the problem of, I want to create insight documentation that's only available to editors, okay? And it's actually easier and trickier than you would expect. It's easier in the sense that the book module included in core provides a lot of the functionality. It's trickier than you would expect because it's hard to hide the content from regular users and only, have the book content module only available to editors. And that's why this recipe also enabled a content access module, which basically lets us say that book content is only for admins or editors. So now your editors are going to be able to access this user guide, but regular users won't see that. This won't even show up in the menu, and they won't see this content. The idea for the user guide is, first of all, that it just sort of gives you a template of a guide to this site, and it has a couple of demonstration pages, goals and objectives. These are ideally pages that you would fill in to just sort of create, what theme did we use and why, what are our custom modules that, maybe you could have this information for yourself, for future developers, and for the site owner. And they're just sample pages. I also put in this like guide to backdrop user guide section where I basically copied and pasted some of the content from the backdrop user guide, but then linked to the full content. And I included links to some videos I've made. I love feedback on whether or not this is worth pursuing, keeping. It's not clear to me that actually having this content in the site is a good idea, because obviously if you add this content to your site, it won't get updated when the content does on the site. So it might be better to just have a link to the user guide, but I wanted to play around with this idea of providing in-site instructions. And it also includes a glossary, which is not by any means comprehensive. Again, if anybody wants to add to this and create a pull request, please do so. But again, an editor might be working through the backdrop user interface and have questions about what is taxonomies or the difference between taxonomies and vocabularies. And here's just a place right in the site without having to Google it where they could get that information. I don't know. Tell me if it's useful.
Seems
But-
pretty useful to me. I mean, it raises possibilities that I won't hijack to talk about now, but perhaps
Sure.
it could be updatable. You know, maybe we can publish a version of the guide as a feed somewhere
Yeah.
and have a recipe that uses feeds to update nodes as they vary.
Yep.
You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with all those things. The primary use case of the user guide for me was just this ability to create your own sort of user guide. The other
Yeah.
stuff I think is kind of icing or just extras, and I'd be totally comfortable getting rid of those things because they exist elsewhere. But I think the user guide recipe is still valuable in that it's a quick way that you can create kind of this internal documentation that's custom for your site. I have done this on a couple of my client sites. I know of other developers that do this regularly. And here's a recipe to just get you started with it. It gives you the content type you need, turns on the modules you need, gives you a view, just gets it all sort of configured for you right out of the box.
I
But
think
you
it's a
could-
great feature.
Yeah.
I think that most sites don't have that, and most should.
Yes,
So it's good to nudge them in that direction.
exactly. That's sort of the intent of this recipe. So with that, I think we've been through all the existing recipes. I hopefully people have got a site what you can a sense of what you can do with them. I'm going to mention, because I did in the other session, I'm going to a quick promo for if you're using these recipes for sample content, you should be aware of there's one other. It's not a recipe, or it really functions like a recipe, but it was created before we thought of recipes. So there's a module called sample animal content that I created, which maybe I should change it to, change the title and call it a recipe. And if we add, basically all this does is it adds a content type and a bunch of content that you can use if you're theming or doing a demo. I created this module because I was doing theming and testing and wanted to really quickly install a bunch of content. Now, we discovered at our demo on Friday that the images aren't loading properly, and I know they were in the past. So I don't know why that is. We'll have to take a look at it. But basically what this module does is it creates an animal content type and adds some sample content and images so that if you wanted to, give a demonstration on views, you could use this sample animal content to create your demo really quick. Or if you were theming and you wanted to, just see how a bunch of nodes would look on the front page using the default setup, you could add this content. Anyways,
It adds a vocabulary too, it seems.
yeah, the last thing, I did, it does that recipe does add a vocabulary. It was sort of a pre-version of that welcome module, but it was less educational. It didn't teach you about Backdrop, it just gave you content and views and taxonomies that you could reverse engineer.
Tim, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I vaguely recall a discussion and maybe an issue somewhere of whether recipes should be a fourth, because in Backdrop we have themes and modules like in Drupal, but we also have layout templates as a third additional project type. And at some point we were discussing whether recipes was needed for them to be a separate type, and we went with modules, so they're listed as modules. Can you please, and I know that you were involved in these discussions, can you please remind me, did we not have the need for them to be a separate thing? Did we conclude that there was no special handling at this moment that needed to be done, and that's why they were left as modules? What?
Well, so I think this remains undecided. It's under discussion, and it's part of the future of recipes discussion.
Right.
The key points here are, one, that functionally recipes are modules right now, right? So putting them on the module page was just an easy thing to do. It will require some work to define them as a separate type of project and have them listed. Now, work has begun on that. John Lampton has started a module that would create sort of a recipes tab and allow you to filter out and just sort of view the recipes and download them without sort of having to do that extra step. But I don't know how close that module is to completion. Some feedback I've gotten is that for end users, sort of site builders, that the distinction might actually be counterproductive. And I don't know if this is true or not. I'd like more feedback, but if I add the, I don't know, what's another module? Why can I not think of the name of a module? I'm trying to think of something with some sort of functionality. Let's just go to in all new modules. We're going to clear this. If I add the, I don't know, well, the honeypot module, right? And I add the FAQ module, right? We're defining the FAQ module as a recipe. Does the average user understand the difference between the honeypot module? Right. They don't, or do they care? Right. Even for their purposes, they need something on their site. And the honeypot module happens to be more complicated and does require new PHP code. The FAQ recipe doesn't, but does the client care?
My main reason why I was asking is if people want to find recipes, the current sort of like methodology is just add the word recipe to the module name so that they can search by it, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. That's currently what we're doing. One of the advantages of having a recipe project type would be to address a concern that Laren has raised, which is Laren has created something like recipes for paragraphs. So he's calling them prefab paragraphs right now, which they are, but basically they're paragraph recipes, and where you can just download a batch of prefab paragraphs, and then you can enable them on any content type or any site if you want them. And he's made the point that he thinks that he would give a site editor the ability to add a paragraph type, whereas he wouldn't give them the ability to add a module type, because they can do a lot more damage by adding a module. So what right now, with the way recipes work, is that you'd have to have the ability to download and install any module in order to install a recipe. If recipes were a different project type, we could provide that as a permission to certain users. I think in their current state, that I don't know that there's a big advantage to that, because but I could see down the road where it would be helpful where we might want to do that. We don't want somebody adding backup and migrate to the site, but we want them to be able to add an FAQ, recipe.
Yeah, I think you're underselling the potential there. I mean, one of the really nice things about recipes is that it's a very accessible feature for sort of content focused users. And I mean, there are some things like that within modules, but there are lots and lots and lots of much more, wiring exposed developer level things in modules. So I think there's considerable value to be had of a section which is approachable and friendly and, not as intimidating, not as dangerous. And perhaps later on, once it's established, we may want to revisit the modules page and see if we can't build some of those distinctions usefully into that list to surface some of those more accessible modules to people who can do that. In the meantime, I don't think you should discourage Jen or whoever from allowing the recipes to be easily accessed.
No.
I think.
Go ahead.
So I think the thing Jen is building is like a contrib module,
right,
that if you have modules that are recipes, it'll show only those. Right. So it's like an alternative to the modules page.
Yep.
Could you try installing that, Tim?
I could.
I don't know if there's a release.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's not a release, but we could. So this is, you can use demo sites. Do you know what it's called?
I think it's just called recipes.
Okay.
or recipe UI or something like that.
Well, sure. We can show the folks at home watching this.
How fearless
are a
we
lot
are
of-
to go into totally unscripted territory during a
Yeah.
demo.
Here it
Um,
is. I think this is it. Recipes module. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think as far as like what is actually needed to make them useful is just a better user interface.
Okay. So this is something that probably most people don't know is that if there isn't a release for a modular theme, you can still install it on a demo site the way we used to do it on Drupal 7. I'm just going to copy the link to this experimental module, which I found in the recipe space. And I'm going to go back to the install new modules feature, but I'm going to hit the manual install button. And I'm going to go down here, install from a URL, and hit install. And this could destroy our entire site, in which case I think we're okay. We're pretty much done with it. But enable newly added module. Yeah, let's do it. I'm sorry, did I already? Nope, I didn't.
Yep, there it is.
I didn't enable. I installed it, but I didn't enable it. So we'll do that now.
So the manual installation, why you sort of like missed the thing, yeah, you didn't miss it. It was why you're wondering is that the project installer, once it downloads the modules, it offers the options to enable it. But when you do a manual installations, we haven't hooked that into the installer step where it says you can start enabling. So that's a feature request if you like.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so this module starts to work. However, some of these features aren't complete. I'm aware of that. So for example, Jen is envisioning the ability to revert a module or a recipe. She has not made that operational yet, but she built it into the UI. So if you install this module and then tried to revert the FAQ recipe, nothing's going to happen.
Right.
I don't know well, this isn't really an installer right now. This is really for managing.
Right.
This is for managing your recipes once you have installed them. But I
Mhm.
could
And
totally
this is-
imagine this.
yeah. Yeah, you're right.
I had thought that it would also let you install them and give you sort of a filtered view of them right off the bat. But Jen might be thinking of that more as a core feature if we ever had a recipe.
We have
type.
another feature request that we're aiming to add tags to the modules page, so the recipe could be a tag that people can filter by. So that's another solution there. Because my thinking is that for them to be separate entities or types, there needs to be reason for special handling. If there's no special need for them to be something else, they might as well, as you said, for simplicity and for to not complicate matters for newcomers, right? More, we can keep them as they are, and take advantage of those tags things once it's in. I would like to throw this there, because when you were discussing I know that I'm drawn more to like core issues and I contribute to that, but the reason why I didn't get involved for into the recipe things was that I lack creativity, so I didn't know what to sort of like make a recipe for. But one thing that has always been in my head is the out-of-the-box initiative in Drupal, which is basically umami. The umami theme and content is the product of that. So maybe it may sound ambitious to port that to Backdrop, but the content is already there. So for less creative people like myself, basically we'll have to just adjust things, and then we'll have a on top of having an individual thing that is more rich, right, than those simple recipes with ready-made content. Then we would allow people to install Drupal with umami and Backdrop with umami and see if like there's any difference and be able to compare. So here's an idea that, in other words, for people.
Yes,
but
I agree.
Yeah, but
so in talking
I see now the usefulness of recipes, and I'm not sure umami. I see that it's implemented as a theme, but at some point I know that there was notion of having it as a installation profile or something. But I see now with recipes that there was another discussion. Let me back up a bit about whether we should have we should make themes first-class citizens, as in allow them to do certain things that modules do, like update hooks and things that they don't do anymore. So recipes might be a gateway to that. Instead of creating a theme that requires to do such things, maybe you can create a recipe that actually has the theme and whatever modules as dependencies on top of that. So I see other use cases for this as well, besides the obvious or the intended initial usage. So it's good. Thanks for working on that.
So we've talked about like adding making theme dependencies on a recipe. If that is that a good idea or not? The closest I've got to that was the suggestion that I sort of have a recipe where it says, right in the content that's provided on the site, this theme might work better with this, or this recipe might work better with this theme, but it's totally up to the user. I think like there's a whole spectrum of how complex recipes can get. And right now it's really up to the person creating it to decide how complex they want it. Down the road, we might want to if we had a recipe a project type, we would probably need to then set some criteria for what qualifies as a recipe. But
another use case, before we run out of time, there was a series, I can't remember the name of the series exactly. There was a series of blog articles a person was writing about simplifying things for content editors, and it's like not theme decisions, but features that are already there as configuration in Drupal, or spend time to fine grain the views or make it easier, or change the menus, the order of the menu, the administration menu, so that people are not overwhelmed. And it was a series of 3 or 4 blog articles. I'll try to find them and link to them. That it was sort of like what they used to do for every single customer that they had, so that it makes it easier for the content editors, right? And because they were doing it repetitively, the problem that they were sort of like pointing out was that as an agency or a freelancer, when you are ready to hand over a site, you would want your customer to be happy and to have a less overwhelming experience, like taking things out of the way when they don't need them, with permissions maybe, or that. But that takes time to tweak the site. But they found themselves doing the same things repetitively. So I think that they ended up scripting it or putting it in a module or a theme. I can't remember. So recipes is a good use case for that. So if you're an agency that you find yourself doing the same configuration, installing the same maybe custom modules over and over with your customers or for your customers before you deliver a site, maybe a recipe in that case could be a solution for that, just to automate common repetitive tasks that you do before you deliver the site to the customer that are the same for each customer. Right.
So, go ahead.
You can go first.
Well, I was just going to say, to some extent, distributions are just like really ambitious recipes, except the one difference between a distribution and a recipe, again, is that some distributions actually have custom code in them, which, must be enabled and remain. Right?
And they lock you in, because then it remains the installed profile, and then it causes other issues.
Well, I think the problem with the install profiles, I think has been that you can include modules in them. And so people would include a custom version of views. And if you tried to update views outside of your distribution, it would break. And so that would lock people into their distribution versions, but they're dependent on their Drupal versions.
Right.
So I think if you didn't do that, if you only had your own code in there, it would have a lot less problems.
Yes. Distributions don't have to lock you in. They lock you in when they do custom things. If they relied exclusively on existing contrib modules and existing contrib themes, then you wouldn't be locked in. You could just enable them and then disable them. And I have used ones like that before. Do you want to make a different point, Joseph?
I was just going to say that so my use case, like what I was envisioning with this is my dad and I have a multi-site that we put all the sites we host on. And so I wanted to be able to, when someone asks for a feature, like an image gallery, be able to set up the basic structure of an image gallery, put it in there and just put it on our multi-site and let
Mhm.
all of our users have them.
Mhm.
And then have a separate user interface that I was like a separate modules page basically where I could say, okay, these are safe for
Yeah.
our users to install and enable or disable, and it won't break the system.
Yep.
And then hide, like, I don't want them to be able to enable and disable views. But
Okay. So
Right.
Joseph, what you have you there's this module which is called what you modules permissions, what it's called. It sounds like that you were trying to provide to customers a restricted version of the modules page that doesn't list all the modules, but only selectively the ones that you want to have listed, right?
yes.
There's a module for that. So,
But I also I also want it to look more like WordPress's plugin page where it has
Right.
like a
Oh, fair
nice
enough.
little icon and a little description and like 3 or 4 buttons.
Yeah, because we restrict that in SaaS customers. We restrict the access to permissions in certain pages, and we restrict access to the functionality, the extend page. So they cannot, SaaS customers cannot enable and disable modules directly from these pages.
Right.
And we are using modules. There's 2 modules that we have installed. I remember the modules permissions module, which sounds funny, and custom permissions or something like that. And then there's one that restricts, like that allows you to specify an allow list of modules. And then you say customers can only see in the modules page only these modules.
Right.
And user 1 or people with higher permissions can see the rest, like the entire list of modules. I'll try to find that in Drupal land, and I'll provide a link somewhere in Zoom.
Yeah, we have a bunch of settings that are disabled because we want to like let people see the file settings page, but we don't want them to be able to change where the files directory is.
Sure.
Tim, I have one
I also
question.
find that we're getting a little astray from config recipes, and we're getting near the end of the hour. So I wanted to throw it back to Tim if you wanted to get to any concluding remarks.
Well, I'll have to say goodbye before anyone else talks.
Okay.
Sorry, guys, I have to go. I'll see you guys. Thanks.
We'll see you. Thanks for coming,
presenting
Greg.
this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Luke, because yes, we are almost out of time. We can run over a couple of minutes, I think, if we need to. But the one thing I didn't cover that I wanted to is to talk about how to create a recipe. And let me do this really quick. So the points that Joseph and Greg are, we also want to talk about the future of recipes, and I think that was covered there, right? Which is this idea that we can define them as a recipe type. There's good arguments for that. I think both pro and con. I'm probably leaning towards the pro, but having them as a special project type so that we can do things like what Joseph wants to do, and what Jen wants to do. The current one of the big blockers of recipes right now is it's a little bit difficult to make them. I mean, it's relatively easy, but it's not push button easy, right? Where the comparable feature in Drupal 7, which was features, we had a user interface that you could use to create a feature like module, which is very similar to a recipe in ways, but different in others. If we could build that user interface to create recipes, I think they would be a much more valuable thing, and we'd see more interest in them. But barring that, they're not too hard to make, and that you don't need to write any custom code to create a recipe. I'm looking at the project page. Oh, sorry. I had the project page for a specific recipe. There we go, the testimonial recipe. And basically the minimal ingredients, none of my recipes, unfortunately, include the minimal. They all have something extra. Some of them have a little bit of CSS to make them look good out of the box. That CSS is only going to work as long as the recipe is enabled. If you disable that, everything will still work except for the CSS, which maybe you have a custom theme and you don't care about that. Images and text, this is my sample content. So this is not required in a recipe, but because I wanted some sample content, I put some text files and some images. What's required is the config files. Okay, you need your config files that you use to create the individual fields, the field instances. This one has an image style. It has a node type, and it has a view. So we just basically we have those at a very minimum. You've got those config files, and you have a .info file. And the .info file basically the .info file. In order for your recipe to work, you need to be running Backdrop version 1.20 or greater. So you need this statement in the .info file, and that's it. I have been creating this packages equals recipe. This is sort of a behind the scenes thing in case we ever did create tools that wanted sort of a project type called recipes. But right now there isn't anything that does anything with that. I hear Joseph trying to, I think.
You could you can actually put whatever you want in these. So you could add a recipes equals true in your info file.
Okay.
And then have a module that looks for those and only displays those.
Yes, I think we've talked about that before too. Yeah. The last thing that you're required to have in your recipe is a .module file that is empty. We really don't. We don't expect to see anything in the .module file. It's required right now by Backdrop. Just it doesn't recognize a module as a module unless it has this file. But we don't really want any code in here because I think in theory recipes you should at least have the option to disable them and they still work. And if you had any code in your .module file, that would no longer work once you disabled the recipe. So ideally you don't have anything there. But the modules. So we need a .info file. We need at least an empty .module file, and we need some config. That's the minimum. I've added some other things. I've also added a .install file, which has PHP in it, but this is just running installation to create the sample content and nodes. If you turn off the module, it doesn't matter because this code only gets run on installation and it's never looked at again. So that's most of my recipes all have an install file. And as Greg pointed out, we could use that .install file to display a message at the end of the installation process to sort of tell the user what they've, what fields and things were created. In the last, based on questions of the last session, if you wanted to create a recipe, probably the way I would do it is set up a clean Backdrop install. Build your recipe out, do the config necessary for the recipe, and then you could do basically a diff or compare the original config files to the ones that were created after you made your recipe, and all of those new files, they would go in this directory. And so basically, if you did that, you dumped all the config files that you created into this, and then created a .info file, you for all practical purposes, you have a recipe and you haven't written any code. There's sort of no code necessary. We do need to wrap this up. I don't think I have anything more to add. We've talked a bit about the future of recipes. Are they a project type? Are they, can we build an installer? These are things we need help on. If anybody's excited by this idea and wants us to help us build or the creator, a UI tool where you could just sort of export the recipe from an existing site without having to do what I just said, that would be really helpful and move this project forward. Any final questions or comments from anyone else? Go ahead.
Just blue skying something that I'm not personally capable of doing, but it seems like one could port the features module and strip out the back end and have it create recipes, right? But you use its selection features,
right,
to choose the things.
Tim, if you create a recipe and you install it, can you alter that later? In other words, if you wanted to add, say I made a recipe that was a client type.
Yep.
And somebody else wanted to use it, but they wanted to add a field to it.
Yep.
Is that possible?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
All recipes are sort of jump starts or quick starts.
Okay.
They build the content type in pretty much the same way you would have, but they do it quicker. So
Right.
once the recipe is installed, you have complete control to modify it in any way you want that you could normally have done, right? The recipe won't give you any new things that you couldn't have done before, but it will allow you to continue to modify it in any way you want.
So if you modify it, your config's going to change though too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So
you have-
once you've
Right.
changed the config, those config files will no longer match what they originally were.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But Yep, but that's okay, right? That's part of the benefit. Anybody else have any final questions? I think that in terms of the next upcoming meeting, it's just the four of us, so we don't have to cancel or stop this. But we've been going for an hour, so let's. I don't have links handy to send you to, but there is. I have written a blog post or two. If you Google Backdrop CMS config recipes, you'll find a blog post or two. Unfortunately, a lot of that is dated, so I'm going to try to do an updated blog post about config recipes that sort of updates where we're at today and lists some of these things that we'd like to see happen in the future. Please, I've gotten very, very little feedback from people that have tried and used recipes, and I'd love to get more of it. So if you've tried out these recipes and either, and you like them and found them useful, let me know. That motivates me to make more. If you've tried them and found like you think they could be a little bit better, by all means, let me know as well. There's issue queues for each of the recipes, just like there are regular modules. So you can go into the issue queue or you can just ping me directly. Hey, thanks everybody. Let's wrap this meeting up and we'll see you all at the next community meeting. I am going to stop